Hello and welcome to this webinar from Agrorganic. I'm Christian Thompson, working as a consultant in Agrorganic. And today we have Frederick, my colleague, with us. And we are going to talk about, or Frederick is going to talk about foliar fertilization. And he has been studying it and made a presentation he will walk through with us today. So
Thank you very much, Christian. So I'm Frederick. I'm an agronomist here at Agrorganic, and today we will talk about foliar fertilization. So, and thank you for having me, Christian, here in our Agrorganic studio.
Thank you.
Yes, so we will swap the screens and get started. Well, foliar fertilization, can we achieve more with less? So I will shortly introduce what is foliar fertilization, then we will do some of the good stories, the tips and tricks, and then we will finish with some economic perspectives. So let's get started. What is foliar fertilization? Foliar fertilization is liquid fertilizer applied with real low drift nozzles, not with these drip nozzles you know from traditional liquid fertilization applications. The purpose is to deposit our spray solution on a leaf, not the soil, and then we fertilize directly into the plant and then bypassing the soil buffer system. And just to exemplify where do our different nutrients go, we have the proteins right here. That's the whole purpose of nitrogen fertilization. You need to remember that 70 to 80% of our proteins in our green healthy wheat crop is made into Rubisco enzymes, which is part of this photosynthesis process where we convert and capture sugar. Obviously, the closest relative to proteins is the straight building blocks, which is amino acids. And then further we go down here, we have ammonia and ammonium, nitrogen fertilizer and nitrate and urea down here. So the closer we can get to our finished product, the closer we are in this in the fertilizer application, and it's more economic for the plant to take it and uses less waste energy to convert our nitrogen fertilizer into our finished proteins. And then we have all the other nutrients which adds different pathways in this protein synthesis process. What is the risk of applying nutrients to the soil? We have a lot of different things, especially nitrogen can both leach further down and out of our root zone, but it can also evaporate during our growing season. Then phosphorus can get locked in with our soil particles. Potassium and sulfate do also have leaching risk. And then it's similar with the different nutrients. They can all be locked and leach and make it difficult for our plants and our management to capacitate. Then we have this further perspective of the soil pH, which influences nutrients differently. So some will get more available with higher soil pH, and some will get less accessible with lower. So it's this difficult thing I'm sure you have seen before, where we normally are around our neutral soil pH, where it's the best compromise of availability of the different nutrients. And how does this nitrogen cycle look like? So the nitrogen cycle is pretty straightforward in the way that we can apply either urea, ammonium, or nitrate straight to our soil, and then a lot of different things can happen before they are built into our plant. Both nitrate and ammonium have this nice opportunity that it can both be taken up by the leaf directly or through the roots. And then we have urea, which can only in its pure form be taken up in the leaf. Otherwise, the urea, when applied to the soil, needs to be changed from urea into ammonium and further to nitrate if possible, but also directly as ammonium. The problem is that all these processes has its consequences and trade-offs. Ammonium has the risk of evaporation. Nitrate has the problem of both leaching, but also to to get reduced further to atmospheric nitrogen, or in worst case in nitrous oxide, which will also evaporate out of our soil. And the nitric acid adds a very important carbon dioxide gas. It has a very, very strong short-term greenhouse effect, and we don't really want that, both from a greenhouse emissions perspective, but also from a nitrogen use efficiency, because fertilizer is expensive and we use a lot of money to buy our nitrogen, so there's no need to have it either evaporate or leach or denitrify. So that leads us to urea. It's straightforward. It is usually cheap to buy, and we can get it directly into the leaf. And then we have this additional perspective with the urea, is that it contains a carbon molecule in our carbon atom in our urea molecule. And that has a really nice effect, because we can actually reasonably cheap, we can get one free carbon atom right into our plant. So we can actually carbon fertilize our crop by using urea compared to the other ones. And that has a small academic perspective as well. So how does our fertilizer, our leaf of our foliar fertilizer, get into the leaves? It has three main entry points, mainly from the stomata cells on the leaf bottom leaf surface. Normally we say there's 10 times more stomata openings on the lower part of the leaves compared to the upper parts, which is the ones being directly hit by sunlight. This makes sense because the plant wants to be more water efficient and not lose excessive water when opening the stomata. And the purpose of these stomata cells are to open the possibility for fresh new air into the leaf in order for the photosynthesis to consume the carbon dioxide in our atmospheric air. Then we have two other possibilities. We have the leaf hairs on the upper surface of the leaf, which act as a uptake channel for our foliar fertilizer. And you know it from different weed species and plant species have different levels of visible hairs. All plant leaves do have hairs. It's just different how visible they are by the naked eye. For example, broom species are very easy recognizable in our fields by having a quite strong and easy visible amount of hair on the leaves. And then we have the cuticle, which is this annoying waxy layer which prevents our spray to go into the leaves on normal late season summer sprays, because we have a very deep cuticle layer, but it also acts as a pathway for our foliar fertilizer earlier in the season, because we can have openings and cracks in our cuticle, which helps our foliar fertilizer to get into the leaf.
What can we do actually to improve that uptake by the leaves? Is there anything we can do to our fertilizer?
So there's a lot of tips and tricks and additives we use for our fertilizer, and we will get into that further down here. So the main things for a foliar fertilizer is to, like all spray operations we do, we need good spraying conditions for good leaf uptake. So we want relative humidity higher than 50%. We do not want rain immediately after we have applied our foliar fertilizer, because we want it to soak into our leaves and not into the soil. We want this good air temperature optimum between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius. We do not want strong direct sunlight immediately after application. And then it's very important that we use these droplet flattening adjuvants, which helps our foliar spray to stick to the leaf and not get tossed away. And then from a formulation perspective, we want droplets where our droplets stay as liquid droplets for as long as possible in order to get taken up by the leaf and not dry out and get crystallized on the leaf surface. And we have exemplified that here in this droplet test, which shows that different fertilizer salts has different possibilities to stay in solution for longer. And the most important thing is that we want these combinations of fertilizer solutions in order to stay liquid and soluble for as long as possible, in order to get it into the leaves and not crystallize. We do not get fertilizer into the leaf by having them dry crystallized on the surface.
And it's a matter of formulation.
And it's a formulation thing, both mainly what types of fertilizer we use, what salts and what molecules are they made of. So there's another important part of our foliar fertilization is to actually get our foliar spray to stay on the leaf and not on the soil. And as exemplified on the pictures to the right, we see that we have different nozzle options. These popular single or double angled spray nozzles are very important because we have much better opportunity to spray and stick to our leaves and not spray in between the leaves. As you see here, this is a traditional low drift flat fan nozzle we have here on this upper one, and here we have some of these more popular modern angled low drift nozzles where we have dual fan, both 30 degrees forward and 30 degrees backwards, which makes much more leaf contact. Just to perspective, I found this old 20 years old trial where they used traditional flat fan nozzles, and the larger our wheat crop gets and the more it grows from spring through early summer, the more it's likely that we will be able to deposit foliar fertilizer on our leaves. So normally it's rule of thumb between 35 and 60% in the early, late tillering stages, and then as long as our bolting and heading starts, we get 80 to 90% deposit on the leaves. The good part of winter rapeseed growing is that it grows quite frequently already early in the or late in the winter, early in the spring, so we get high likelihood of depositing our foliar sprays on the leaves, more than 80%. So the big fear of foliar fertilizing has always and is probably always been scorching. So what is this scorching and how can we work around it? The first thing to say is that it's about salt exposure and salt concentrations in our leaves, and it's mainly a risk associated with nitrate fertilization. So as soon as we select foliar fertilizer based on urea, we have a much reduced risk of scorching our wheat crop. Exemplified in this trial below, we see that 22 kilos of nitrogen as a 50-50 nitrate ammonium fertilizer applied to our crop. We had 4% leaf burn, whereas we see virtually zero leaf burn as soon as we go for 100% urea-based foliar fertilizer. And this is a trial where they deliberately tried to overdose the foliar fertilization. Here we see that 44 kilos of pure nitrogen to the hectare sprayed onto the leaves in a 50-50 ammonium nitrate dosage really had high risk of scorching our leaves. And we quite interesting to see it's much higher than what we would normally recommend, but 44 kilos of nitrogen as 100% pure urea solution actually has a reasonably safe scorching, even though it's as high as 44 kilos. So normally we are not higher than 20 kilos of nitrogen to the hectare is our recommendation, but here we deliberately try to overdose to get more scorching. And then there's all these other things about sticking our solutions to the leaf, and also avoid these midday high temperature, high sunlight conditions. So again, late evening sprays or extremely early morning sprays are preferred. Mainly the evening sprays, because then it's also dry plants and we can get more on our leaves. So how much can we apply? In general, a hungry plant in good conditions can tolerate more foliar fertilizer, whereas a stressed plant, either from abiotic or biotic stresses, tolerates less. And then, of course, low night temperatures increases the risk of leaf scorching. So normally we are in this sweet spot of 10 to 20, 30 kilos per application time in cereals, and a reasonable amount of phosphorus, potassium, and sulfate as well. Whereas corn is, as also for granular mineral fertilizer, corn is a really tricky and risky crop to apply too much per timing. So here, a good way past our presentation, the summary so far is that we can apply fertilizer directly to our crops. All nutrients can be applied. Foliar fertilization should be deposited with flat fan nozzles on our leaves and not to drip off and get into the soil. We need to be aware that most pesticides are mixable with the right foliar fertilizers, but as always, when mixing multiple products, be aware, do a small pre-mixing test to see, does these pesticides mix with my foliar fertilizer I have in mind? And then, of course, with many new things carrying a reasonable risk to your farming businesses, be aware of the options and the risks. Start small and build on experience. Yes. So how does this look in practice? Is there any good stories around? To highlight, this is a traditional high-yielding winter wheat crop fertilization strategy where we apply some nitrogen late winter, early spring, and we wait for some rain to soak it down. And then, depending on quality characteristics, we might apply something in the late bolting stage, so we can get higher protein content. As always with granular fertilizer, please remember it takes at least 7 days from we have applied. We need some sufficient rain, maybe only 5 or 10 millimeters, but we need the granules to be diluted and get into our soil solution. And this gets more and more difficult and problematic the drier the season is and the less rain we get. Also because our crop takes up nutrients from further down in the soil and not in the top when the top is dried out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
because when in this dry conditions we've seen, it's starting to get dry early in the spring, and you get maybe you see the fertilizer is dissolved, but if it's only dissolved in the top layer, which is totally dried out and not available for the roots anyway. So
as soon as our soil dries out, there's no water, and water is so important for our microbiology in our soil and also for our nutrient cycling. So no water, no microbiology, and no functioning nutrient cycling. So it makes sense that if we apply in the surface, it needs to rain in, because we easily get a 5, 10 or more centimeter topsoil dry out in our dry spring conditions, which is to be avoided. And that means either very early mineral granular fertilizer application or foliar fertilization. So the traditional strategy could look like this, but carries a management risk and a leaching risk. Where can we put in a foliar fertilization strategy, which we have borrowed this example from some of our friends at this Danish foliar fertilizer company called Flex Fertilizer. Normally, it's a straightforward and easy strategy to do what we call a 50-50 strategy. So 50% of our nitrogen requirement, or our in-crop nitrogen requirement, we will apply as granular fertilizer on the soil, and the second half we will apply as foliar fertilizer during the later crop growing stages. So we apply in the late winter, early spring. We apply the first, in this case, almost 100 kilos of nitrogen, and then throughout the bolting stages and the early heading stages, we will apply 2, 3, maybe 4 timings of foliar fertilizing when we are anyway out in the field with our sprayer.
I have a question, because also the thing about getting the right amount for the yield which we are looking into,
Yes, that's a very important thing.
Yeah.
So always when we do nitrogen fertilizer applications, we have two main tasks to keep in mind. How much nitrogen do we expect our soil and field will provide to our crop? That is from cover crops, soil mineral, mineralization potential, carbon content in our soil. All has a matter to say how much nitrogen will our soil provide. And then secondly, we need to take good care of how much do we actually expect to harvest in this. Is this a 6 tons to the hectare wheat field? Is it 8 tons? Is it 10 tons? Is it 12 tons? We need to decide that on the time of application, or at least the latest application. And that gets easier the further advanced our season is, and gets more difficult the earlier the season is, because it's very difficult to predict the weather 4 months in advance. And that's why it makes sense that we can add more management flexibility if we can postpone our fertilizer applications, being foliar, to later crop stages, both to target our yield expectations, but also our quality perspectives. And that normally we also have this big advancement with satellite yield prediction, which really gets going and gets easier the further advanced our crop is from the stage 37 onwards. Some trial results we have seen around in recent year is this example is a winter barley trial where they have applied half the nitrogen, or some nitrogen on the soil, and then 2 timings of foliar nitrogen later. And the interesting thing is that we have a lot of cases where there's almost no yield differences between the soil applied and the foliar applied strategies, but we see these high yieldings. It's exceptional that we have almost 2 tons to the hectare of yield benefit by applying foliar fertilizer compared to a traditional granular strategy. It's not expected that it's because some barley varieties respond more to foliar fertilization than others. It's more a matter of the crop variability in the results. But the most important thing is that it's exceptional with 2 tons yield improvement by the foliar fertilization. And that's really the exciting news, is that if we can understand why this is happening, we can have a very exciting future ahead by having some of these outliers being so high yield. And that's why it's very interesting with foliar fertilizer, but it also shows why we should try and understand and work more with foliar fertilization, because if nothing else, and it's equally good as traditional granular fertilizer, then we still have a lot of biological benefits of doing foliar fertilization. But if we some years can get these high outliers with more than 2 tons yield benefit, then it's exceptional and very interesting. Another thing which was clear from this trial, which is quite interesting, is that with the foliar strategy, we get less topsoil nitrogen, which means that our volunteers, our post-harvest volunteers, are more depleted of available nitrogen, whilst our soil applied seemed to have more lush and vigor because there was more nitrogen in the topsoil. That relates to the nitrogen use efficiency, but also that we might get a side effect on weed management in our foliar strategies. And another trial we will present for you here is a traditional 200 units of nitrogen to the hectare granular strategy. To the left and the right, one is one timing, another one is split timing, and then we have a 50-50 foliar strategy in the middle, where we apply half of our nitrogen requirement as a foliar spray. That is roughly, in this trial, there was 1 tons yield benefit of doing the foliar fertilization. So our crop went from a 9 tons to the 10 tons crop. But the most interesting is actually also what is our nutrient use efficiency. And this nutrient use efficiency is basically how much nitrogen do I harvest and take out of my field compared to how much nitrogen I have applied to the field. And in this case, our traditional strategy was around 60%, 0.6 in nutrient use efficiency. So 60% of applied nitrogen was taken out in the grains, whereas with the foliar, we increased that to 70%, so a quite significant increase and a quite exciting increase in nitrogen use efficiency from the foliar fertilization. Obviously, the lower amount of nitrogen you apply, the more higher the likelihood of a high nutrient use efficiency is, but it's very interesting for such high yielding crops as this winter wheat field in this trial. We were able to get very attractive use efficiencies. Ideally, we would like to be at 100, but we also have a little bit of nitrogen in our straw, maybe in the roots, but mainly in the straw also. And then it's most likely that if we have a 100% use efficiency, that's because we have applied too little of nitrogen, actually. So 70 to 80, maybe 85% is our prime target for our use efficiencies of nitrogen. Is it only nitrogen? And yes and no, because there's also a quite interesting perspective of foliar phosphorus. And why is that? Normally, when we apply phosphorus, our crop has two main stages where it really needs the phosphorus. The first one is late winter, early spring. The soil is cold, but the crop needs to do more rooting and more tillering and grow vigorously in the late winter, early spring. And that's where phosphorus availability can be an issue because the soil is cold and the microbiology is not working, is not up and running yet because of the lower temperatures. But our crop is starting to grow, starting to do the roots, do some tillers, so it needs the phosphorus. And second time we really need phosphorus in our grain crops is for grain filling period. So after the flowering, when our crop fills the grains, we need a lot of phosphorus in that process as well. In this trial, we tried to apply actually only a very small amount. It's not even a kilo of pure phosphorus to the hectare, but it is still increased and gained us almost 30% more tillers in our winter wheat crop compared to our control of no foliar phosphorus. And it's quite interesting we get so much response for such a small amount of phosphorus, but it will, in many conditions also, in many years, it will also depend on what is the late winter, early spring conditions, because you of course need to have your foliar fertilizer targeted to the leaves. So that's a restriction on how early you can be, but it's important that we take these tillers we have from the autumn period and the winter period, and we take those tillers to the harvest because we want most of our yield is from autumn tillers, which makes these nice and big ears. Whereas you've all seen winter wheat crops where you have some late tillers in a poorly developed wheat field, and those late tillers are always very small heads and not really contributing much to the yield. So that's why we want well-developed plants, and we really want to stick to our autumn tillers and get them through this tricky period in early spring and get a good harvest.
It's also the perspective on many of the lands we work with is some are in poor phosphorus conditions and have wrong pH levels. And I really see a perspective in doing this on those lands because
Yes, exactly.
you don't have the buffer in the soil, but you apply it directly.
Yes, for sure. That's a very important point that if you have less than optimum soil pH conditions, you have a limited phosphorus availability, which depending on when you expect to correct your low soil pH, you have a more likely benefit of these foliar applied phosphorus fertilizers as well. So what is the economic perspective? In a recent literature review of the international trials made by the University of Copenhagen actually last year, they concluded that there was most likely a 14% saving in nitrogen, applied nitrogen, while still having the same yield. So that means a higher use efficiency. So for a 50-50 strategy, that would mean roughly 30 units of nitrogen in a high yield winter wheat crop could be saved by doing foliar fertilizer and still have the same yield. And depending on your local nitrogen prices, we are looking into something like 30 euros per hectare. So it's something, but it's not a revolution in that perspective. Another important perspective of the foliar fertilization is that we really have the opportunity to stick with urea and have a urea-based fertilization application. Urea is a great fertilizer. We talked about the possibilities for carbon fertilization as well, but urea has severe limitations when it gets warmer and more dry in the late half of our cropping season. So that's why soil applied urea, when the soil is cold and it's less than 10 degrees, that's great. But as soon as it gets warm soil and more than 10 degrees air temperature, we have a too high risk of nitrogen evaporation from our urea. And that's why we traditionally swap away from urea-based fertilizers for the later half. We do ammonium nitrate or something similar. But with our foliar perspective, we can stick to the urea and then dissolve in water and apply with our field sprayer to the leaves. And normally urea is roughly 0.25 euros cheaper per kilo of nitrogen. So we are looking into an additional maybe 25 euros per hectare of fertilizer. But it depends on your current fertilizer strategy, or you're mainly urea, or you are also having alternatives. Then where do we put it in? It costs money to apply. It's not for sure. It's cheaper to apply with a traditional granular fertilizer spreader 1, maybe 2 times compared to 4 times with a field sprayer. In high-yielding European winter wheats, we normally drive 3-4 times during spring with our field sprayer, because we need to do some follow-up herbicides. We need to do some regulator. We do maybe do 1 or 2 fungicide timings. So we have very good reasons that we are almost at least 3 times in our wheat field or more. And it's most likely that we can apply 20 units of pure nitrogen each time we are doing our other applications with most of our other pesticides. So it's reasonably realistic that we can hit almost 60 to 80 units of nitrogen applied to the leaf while we are anyway out spraying in our field.
Also because logistics on big farms, you need to have it worked in, so you don't have the extra time using or extra going with the sprayer, because
the economics of this is completely changed if we need to add in separate field sprayer applications only with the fertilizer. Of course, if you are a milling grade winter wheat grower, you would normally like to apply some nitrogen at flowering time or in the grain fill period, and then you can put in a foliar fertilization with your field sprayer, but you would anyway have to do a specific targeted nitrogen application. And should I pre-mix, or should I do it my own mixing, or should I buy it finished products? It depends a lot about your scale of operation, but in general, we are talking very easily dissolvable products. So a self-mixing approach is definitely a strategy and something to work on in the future. Right now, we would encourage most of you to just try this foliar fertilizer, no matter your scale. Buy in some finished products, so you know from a reliable supplier, so you know that all the formulations are right with sugar source, adjuvants, spray solution, pH, etc. So you get a premium foliar product. And then further down the road, when you've determined how does this fit my operation, if it fits my operation, then you can look into doing some of the mixing, dissolving yourself. But there's plenty of opportunities in that regard. Yes, and what is here to the end? You made it through. The perspectives and the summary is that if we can get the nitrogen price and the logistics working right, we can do foliar fertilization, and it is highly relevant. There is maybe some synergy effects between fungal disease pressures and weed management from our foliar fertilization. It makes sense that a well-balanced nutritional diet for our crops has less likelihood of severe disease outbreaks. It might not completely eliminate the disease. We might still see the disease, but our crop responses to the disease would be expected to be much lower. As always, there's 2 types of disease management in our field. There's disease resistance, and then there's disease tolerance. And the foliar fertilization will likely improve the disease tolerance of our crops, so the disease will not make as big yield loss compared to otherwise. And then there's, as we showed earlier, this maybe there's this weed perspective, and I think it's very interesting that we can, especially also in min-till and no-till situations where we have residues and cover crops and straw on top of the soil, if we can get nutrients directly into our crop leaves, we can avoid some of them being immobilized and taken up by the straw degradation process in that perspective. And then the weeds, if we can increase our crop competitiveness by applying the nutrients into the leaves, we can have a better crop competition against the weeds, and hopefully we'll get less weeds. But it's very difficult to do good experiences, both the fungal disease, but also the weeds. But there's a meaningful perspective that it's worth considering. Then we add flexibility. We apply later directly to the leaves, so we have much more season management flexibility to do the right management, especially in dry conditions and dry years. It's likely that foliar fertilizer is better compared to the traditional granular fertilizer. Yeah. Very excitingly, with the foliar fertilizer, we have much more ad hoc targeting compared to leaf sap analysis. So we can do a leaf sap analysis. A few days later, we can get the result, and we can actually correct the problems while they emerge, the nutritional deficiencies while they emerge in the field, compared to just doing granular application early in the season and forget about what's happening with the crop. As I mentioned, it's highly relevant in min-till and no-till systems, also with nutrient stratification and this breakdown crop residues. So we definitely believe that it's worth trying, get some experiences, and see if it fits your farming systems.
That's all good. Yeah. I have one question, because you say we encourage the farmers to use it or to try it out. Where should they be most efficient to use it if you want to go like 1 or 2 times? That's your.
That's a very good question, Christian. And I think to a start, I think it's very relevant to get some experience in your winter cereals. Of course, your winter wheat, but also in rye, triticale, or winter barley if you grow that. But in the winter cereals, it's highly relevant. I think there's this very interesting possibility of the leaf phosphorus in the late winter, early spring, where we see the crops are struggling and it's very strong light. So the crops are struggling to get growing in the cold soil conditions and the strong sunlight in the late winter, early spring. Yeah. So that's one place to fit in a foliar phosphorus fertilization. And then when the summer conditions and it gets more dry and the crop has a nutrient stress because of the dry soil, it's relevant to add in maybe around flowering time. So one timing on the flag leaf, maybe one timing at the flowering time. So you also get
where you go anyway.
Where you anyway go with your fungicides, and you get some useful nutrients for your grain fill period in your crop. And that's where I would. So the leaf phosphorus late winter, and then the grain filling phosphorus potassium in the flag in the T2 or T3 timings with the fungicide.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Frederick. And this is a webinar from Agrorganic, and I hope you enjoyed it. You're welcome to reach out to our team if you have any questions regarding this foliar fertilization, or how to embed that in your business on your farm. And we are here to help. And I really hope you enjoyed this topic. And that's it we have today, and hopefully we'll meet out there in the season. Yeah.
Thank you, Christian.
Goodbye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.